scarcely a mile from Harlond, and a great press of his first foes was between him and the haven there, while new foes came swirling behind, cutting him off from the prince. Now he looked to the river, and hope died in his heart, and the wind that he had blessed he now called accursed. But the host of Mordor were enhearted, and filled with a new lust and fury they came yelling to the onset. Stern now was Eomer's mood, and his mind clear again. He let blow the horns to rally all men to his banner that could come thither, for he thought to make a great shield wall at the last, and stand and fight there on foot till all fell, and do deeds of song on the fields of Pelennor, though no man should be left in the west to remember the last king of the Mark. So he rode to a green hillock, and there set his banner, and the white horse ran rippling in the wind.
Out of doubt! Out of dark! To the day's rising! I came singing in the sun, swords unsheathing! To Hope's End I rode, and to hearts breaking! No for wrath! No for ruin! And the red light war!
These staves he spoke, yet he laughed as he said them, for once more lust of battle was on him, and he was still unscathed, and he was young, and he was king, the lord of a fell people. And lo, even as he laughed at despair, he looked out again on the black ships, and he lifted his sword to defy them. And then wonder took him, and a great joy, and he cast his sword up in the sunlight and sang as he caught it, and all eyes followed his gaze, and behold, upon the foremost ship a great standard broke, and the wind displayed it as she turned toward the Harland. There flowed a white tree, and that was for Gondor, but 7 stars were about it, and a high crown above it, the signs of Elendil that no lord had borne for years beyond count. And the stars flamed in the sunlight, for they were wrought of gems by Arwen, daughter of Elrond, and the crown was bright in the morning, for it was wrought of mithril and gold. Thus came Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elessar, Isildur's heir, out of the paths of the dead, borne upon a wind from the sea to the kingdom of Gondor. And the mirth of the Rohirrim was a torrent of laughter and a flashing of swords, and the joy and wonder of the city was a music of trumpets and a ringing of bells. But the hosts of Mordor were seized with bewilderment, and a great wizardry it seemed to them that their own ships should be filled with their foes. And a black dread fell on them, knowing that the tides of fate had turned against them, and their doom was at hand. East rode the knights of Dol Amroth, driving the enemy before them, trollmen and variags and orcs that hated the sunlight. South rode Eomer, and men fled before his face, and they were caught between the hammer and the anvil. For now men leaped from the ships to the quays of the Harlond, and swept north like a storm. There came Legolas and Gimli wielding his axe, and Halbarad with a standard, and Elladan and Elrohir with stars on their brow. And the dour-handed Dunedain, rangers of the north, lending great valor of the folk of Lebanon and Lamondon and the fiefs of the south. But before all went Aragorn with the flame of the west, Andúril like a new fire kindled, Narsil reforged as deadly as of old, and upon his brow was the star of Elendil. And so at length Eomer and Aragorn met in the midst of the battle, and they leaned on their swords and looked on one another and were glad. Thus we meet again, though all the hosts of Mordor lay between us, said Aragorn. Did I not say so at the Hornburg? So you spoke, said Eomer, but hope oft deceives, and I knew not then that you were a man foresighted. Yet twice blessed is this help unlooked for, and never was a meeting of friends more joyful. And they clasped hand in hand. Nor indeed more timely, said Eomer. You come none too soon, my friend. Much loss and sorrow has befallen us.
Then let us avenge it ere we speak of it,
said Aragorn, and they rode back to battle together. Hard fighting and long labour they had still, for the Southrons were bold men and grim, and fierce in despair, and the Easterlings were strong and war-hardened and asked for no quarter. And so in this place and that, by burnt homestead or barn, upon hillock or mound, under or on field, still they gathered and rallied and fought until the day wore away. Then the sun went at last behind Vindolluin and filled all the sky with a great burning, so that the hills and the mountains were dyed as with blood. Fire glowed in the river, and the grass of the Pelennor lay red in the nightfall. And in that hour the great battle of the field of Gondor was over, and not one living foe was left within the circuit of the Ramas. All were slain, save those who fled to die, or to drown in the red foam of the river. Few ever came eastward to Morgul or Mordor, and to the land of the Haradrim came only a tale from far off, a rumour of the wrath and terror of Gondor. Aragorn and Eomer and Imrahil rode back towards the gate of the city, and they were now weary beyond joy or sorrow. These three were unscathed, for such was their fortune and the skill and might of their arms. And few indeed had dared to abide them or look on their faces in the hour of their wrath. But many others were hurt or maimed, or dead upon the field. The axes hewed Forlong as he fought alone and unhorsed, and both Duilin of Morthond and his brother were trampled to death when they assailed the Mumakil, leading their bowmen close to shoot at the eyes of the monsters. Neither Hilduin the Fair would return to Pinathgelin, nor Grimbold to Grimslade, nor Halbarad of the Northlands, dour-handed ranger. No few had fallen, renowned or nameless, captain or soldier, for it was a great battle, and the full count of it no tale has told. So long afterward, a maker in Rohan said in his song of the mounds of Menberg, "We heard of the horns in the hills ringing, the swords shining in the south kingdom. Steeds went riding to the stoning land. As wind in the morning, war was kindled. There Theoden fell, Thengling mighty, to his golden halls and green pastures, in the northern fields never returning. High lord of the host, Harding and Guthlaf, Dunhir and Deorwine, Doughty Grimbold, Herafa and Herubrand, Horn and Thastred, fought and fell there in a far country. In the mounds of Munberg under mould they lie, with their league fellows, lords of Gondor. Neither Hilduin the Fair to the hills by the sea, nor Forlong the Old to the flowering vales. Ever to Arnach, to his own country, returned in triumph, nor the tall bowmen, Derufin and Duilin, to their dark waters. Meres of Morthrond under mountain shadow. Death in the morning and at day's ending. Lords took and lowly, long now they sleep, under grass in Gondor, by the great river. Grey now as tears, gleaming silver, red then it rolled, roaring water. Foam dyed with blood, flamed at sunset, as Beacon's mountains burned at evening. Red fell the dew in Rama's echo. When the dark shadow at the gate withdrew, Gandalf still sat motionless. But Pippin rose to his feet, as if a great weight had been lifted from him, and he stood listening to the halls, and it seemed to him that they would break his heart with joy. and never in after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes. But now, suddenly, his errand returned to his memory, and he ran forward. At that moment, Gandalf stirred and spoke to Shadowfax, and was about to ride through the gate.
No!
Cried Pippin, and Shadowfax halted.
What are you doing here?
Said Gandalf.
The Lord... Some of us stay in the Citadel and let the Lord gives them leave.
He has!
Said Pippin.
He sent me away, but I'm frightened. Something terrible may happen up there. The Lord is out of his mind, I think. I'm afraid he will kill himself and kill Faramir too. Can't you do something?
Gandalf looked through the gaping gate, and already on the fields he heard the gathering sound of battle. He clenched his hand. He said,
The Black Knight is abroad. He will yet bring ruin on us. I have no
But
time.
Faramir!
cried Pippin.
He's not dead, and they will burn him alive if someone does not stop them.
Burn him alive.
Said Gandalf.
What is this tale? Be quick.
Denethor has gone to the tombs,
Said Pippin.
and he has taken Faramir. And he says that we are all to burn, and he will not wait. And they are to make a pyre and burn him on it, and Faramir as well. And he has sent men to fetch wood and oil. And I've told Beregond, but I'm afraid he won't dare to leave his post. He is on guard. And what can he do anyway?
So Pippin poured out his tale, reaching up and touching Gandalf's knee with trembling hands.
Can't you save Faramir?
Maybe I can.
Said Gandalf.
If I do, then others will die, I fear. Well, I must come, since no other help can reach him. But evil and sorrow will come out of this. But in the heart of our stronghold, the enemy has power to strike us. For his will it is that is at work.
Then, having made up his mind, he acted swiftly, and catching up Pippin and setting him before him, he turned Shadowfax with a word. Up the climbing streets of Minas Tirith they clattered, while the noise of war rose behind them. Everywhere men were rising from their despair and dread, seizing their weapons, crying to one another, "Rohan has come!" Captains were shouting, companies were mustering, and many already were marching down the gate. They met the Prince Imrahil, and he called to them.
What are the Mithrandir? No, I hear about fighting on the fields of Gondor. We must gather all the strength that we can find.
You will need every man and more.
Said Gandalf.
Make haste. I will come when I can. But I have an errand to the Lord Denethor. They will not wait. Take command in the Lord's absence.
They passed on, and as they climbed and drew near to the citadel, they felt the wind blowing in their faces, and they caught a glimmer of morning far away. A light growing in the southern sky, but it brought little hope to them, not knowing that evil lay before them, fearing to come too late.
Darkness is passing.
Said Gandalf.
It still lies heavy on the city.
At the gate of the citadel they found no guard.
And Beregond is gone.
Said Pippin hopefully. They turned away and hastened along the road to the closed door. It stood wide open, and the porter lay before it. He was slain, and his key had been taken.
Work of the enemy.
Said Gandalf.
Such deeds he loves. Friend at war with friend. Loyalty divided in confusion of hearts.
Now he dismounted and bade Shadowfax return to his stable.
For my friend,
He said,
you and I should have ridden to the fields long ago. But other matters delay me. It comes swiftly if I call.
They passed the door and walked on down the steep winding road. Light was growing, and the tall columns and carven figures beside the way went slowly by like grey ghosts. Suddenly the silence was broken, and they heard below them cries and the ringing of swords, such sounds that had not been heard in the hallowed places since the building of the city. At last they came to Rath Dinnen, and hastened towards the house of the stewards, looming in the twilight under the great dome.
Stay! Stay!
Cried Gandalf, springing forward to the stone stair before the door.
Stay this smokeless!
For there were the servants of Denethor with swords and torches in their hands, but alone in the porch upon the topmost step stood Beregond, clad in the black and silver of the guard, and he held the door against them. 2 of them had already fallen to his sword, staining the hallows with their blood. And the others cursed him, calling him outlaw and traitor to his master. Even as Gandalf and Pippin ran forward, they heard from within the House of the Dead the voice of Denethor crying,
Renegade, I must do so myself.
Thereupon the door which Beregond held shut with his left hand and was wrenched open, and there behind him stood the lord of the city, tall and fell. A light like flame was in his eyes, and he held a drawn sword. But Gandalf sprang up the steps, and the men fell back from him and covered their eyes, for his coming was like the incoming of a white light into a dark place, and he came with great anger. He lifted up his hand, and in the very stroke the sword of Denethor flew up and left his grasp and fell behind him in the shadows of the house. And Denethor stepped backward before Gandalf as one amazed.
What is this, my lord?
said the wizard.
The houses of the dead are no place for the living, and why do men fight here in the Hallows where there is war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy even come to Rathdin, and since when has the Lord of Gondor been answerable to thee?
Said Denethor.
Or may I not command my own servants? You may,
said Gandalf.
but others may contest your will when it is turned into madness and evil. Where is your son, Faramir? He lies within,
said Denethor.
burning. Already burning. They have set a fire in his flesh. But soon all shall be burned. The West has failed. It shall all go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash, ash and smoke blown away from the wind.
Then Gandalf, seeing the madness that was on him, feared that he had already done some evil deed, and he thrust forward, with Beregond and Pippin behind him, while Denethor gave back until he stood beside the table within. But there they found Faramir, still dreaming in his fever, lying upon the table. Wood was piled under it, and high all about it, and all was drenched with oil. Even the garments of Faramir and the coverlets, but as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. Then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hid in him, even as the light of his power was hidden under his grey mantle. He leapt up onto the faggots, and raising the stickman lightly, he sprang down again, and bore him towards the door. But as he did so, Faramir moaned and called on his father in his dream. Denethor started as one waking from a trance, and the flame died in his eyes, and he wept, and he said,
Do not take my son from me. He calls for me. He calls,
said Gandalf.
but you cannot come to him yet, for he must seek healing on the threshold of death, and maybe find it not. Whereas your part is to go out to the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you. This you know in your heart. He will not wake again.
Said Denethor.
Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side? Authority is not given to you, Steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death.
Answered Gandalf.
And only the heathen kings under the domination of the Dark Power did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death.
Then passing through the door, he took Faramir from the deadly house and laid him on the bier on which he had been brought, and which had now been set in the porch. Denethor followed him and stood trembling, looking with longing on the face of his son. And for a moment, while all were silent and still, watching the Lord in his throes, he wavered.
Come,
said Gandalf.
we are needed. There is much that you can yet do.
Then suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from it the pillow on which his head had lain. Then, coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo, he had between his hands a palantir. And as he held it up, it seemed to those that looked on that the globe began to glow with an inner flame, so that the lean face of the Lord was lit as with a red fire, and it seemed cut out of hard stone, sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. His eyes glittered.
Pride and despair!
He cried.
Didst thou think that the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, grey fool. For thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labour in healing. Go forth and fight. Vanity. For a little space you may triumph on the field, for a day. But against the power that now arises there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of his hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving, and even now the wind of thy hope cheeks thee and wafts up Anduin with a fleet with black sails. The west has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves. Such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed.
Said Gandalf.
Hope on then.
Laughed Denethor.
Do I not know thee, Mithrandir? Thy hope is to rule in my stead, to stand behind every throne, north, south, or west. I have read thy mind and its policies. Do I not know that you commanded this halfling here to keep silence? That you brought him hither to be a spy within my very chamber? And yet in our speech together I have learned the names and purpose of all thy companions. So, with the left hand thou wouldst use me for a little while as a shield against Mordor, and with the right bring up this ranger from the north to supplant me. But I say to thee, Gandalf Mithrandir, I will not be thy tool. I am steward of the house of Anarion. I will not step down to be the dotard chamberlain in an upstart. Even were his claim proven to me, still he comes but of the line of Isildur. I will not bow to such a one, last of a ragged house long bereft of lordship and dignity. What then would you have?
Said Gandalf.
If your will could have its way, I would have things as they were in all the days of my life,
answered Denethor.
and in all the days of my long fathers before me. To be the lord of this city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master, and no wizard's pupil. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated. To me it would not seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor,
said Gandalf.
And at the least you shall not rob your son of this choice while his death is still in doubt.
At those words, Denethor's eyes flamed again, and taking the stone under his arm, he drew a knife and strode towards the bier. But Beregond sprang forward and set himself before Faramir.
So,
cried Denethor,
thou hast already stolen half of my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, and that they rob me wholly of my son at the last. But in this at least thou shalt not defy my will to rule my own end. Come hither!
he cried to his servants.
Come if you are not all recreant!
Then 2 of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched a torch from the hand of one and sprang into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid the fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leapt upon the table, and standing there wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet, and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only 2 aged hands withering in flame. Gandalf in grief and horror turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men.
So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion,
said Gandalf. He then turned to Beregond and the Lord's servants that stood there aghast.
And so pass the days of Gondor that you have known. For good or evil, they have ended. Ill deeds have been done here. But now let all enmity that lies between you be put away, for it was contrived by the enemy and works his will. You have been caught in a net of warring duties that you did not weave. But think, you servants of the Lord, blind in your obedience, that but for the treason of Beregond, Faramir, captain of the White Tower, would now also be burned. Bear away from this unhappy place your comrades who have fallen, and we will bear Faramir, steward of Gondor, to a place where he can sleep in peace, or die, if that be his doom.
Then Gandalf and Beregond, taking up the bier, bore it away towards the houses of healing, while behind them walked Pippin with downcast head. But the servants of the Lord stood gazing as stricken men at the house of the dead. And even as Gandalf came to the end of Rath Dinnen, there was a great noise. Looking back, they saw the dome of the house crack and smoke issue forth, and then with a rush and rumble of stone it fell in a flurry of fire. But still, unabated, the flames danced and flickered among the ruins. Then in terror, the servants fled and followed Gandalf. At length they came back to the steward's door, and Beregond looked with grief at the porter.
This deed I shall never rue,
he said.
But a madness of haste was on me, and he would not listen, but drew sword against me.
Then taking the key that he had wrested from the slain man, he closed the door and locked it.
This should now be given to the Lord Faramir,
he said.
The Lord is in command in the absence of the Lord.
said Gandalf.
But since he is not here, I must take this on myself. I bid you keep the key and guard it until the city is set in order again.
Now at last they passed into the high circles of the city, and in the light of morning they went their way towards the houses of healing. And these were fair houses set apart for the care of those who were grievously sick. But now they were prepared for the tending of men hurt in battle or dying. They stood not far from the citadel gate, in the sixth circle, high to its southward wall, and about them was a garden and a greensward with trees, the only such place in the city. There dwelt the few women that had been permitted to remain in Minas Tirith, since they were skilled in healing or in the service of the healers. But even as Gandalf and his companions came carrying their bier to the main door of the houses, they heard a great cry that went up from the field before the gate, and rising shrill and piercing to the sky passed, and died away on the wind. So terrible was the cry that for a moment all stood still, and yet when it had passed, suddenly their hearts were lifted up in such a hope as they had not known since the darkness came out of the east. And it seemed to them that the light grew clear and the sun broke through the clouds. But Gandalf's face was grave and sad, and bidding Beregond and Pippin to take Faramir into the houses of healing, he went up to the walls nearby, and there like a figure carven in white he stood in the new sun and looked out. And he beheld with the sight that was given to him all that had befallen. And when Eomer rode out from the forefront of his battle and stood beside those who lay upon the field, he sighed, and he cast his cloak about him again, and went from the walls. And Beregond and Pippin found him standing in thought before the door of the houses when they came out. They looked at him, and for a while he was silent. At last he spoke.
My friends,
He said,
and all you people of this city of the western lands, things of great sorrow and renown have come to pass. Shall we weep or be glad? Beyond hope, the captain of our foes has been destroyed, and you have heard the echo of his last despair. But he has not gone without woe and bitter loss, and that I might have averted but for the madness of Denethor. So long has the reach of our enemy become, alas, but now I perceive how his will was able to enter into the very heart of the city. Though the stewards deemed that it was a secret kept only by themselves, long ago I guessed here in the White Tower, one at least of the 7 seeing stones was preserved. In the days of his wisdom, Denethor did not presume to use it, nor to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength. But his wisdom failed, and I fear that as the peril of his realm grew, he looked in the stone and was deceived. Far too often, I guess, since Boromir departed. He was too great to be subdued to the will of the Dark Power. He saw, nonetheless, only those things which that power permitted him to see. The knowledge which he obtained was doubtless often of service to him, yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind.
Now I understand what seemed so strange to me.
said Pippin, shuddering at his memories as he spoke.
The Lord went away from the room where Faramir lay, and it was only when he returned that I first saw he was changed, old and broken.
Said Beregond.
Alas, then I have guessed right,
Said Gandalf.
Thus the will of Sauron entered into Minas Tirith, and thus I have been delayed here. And here I shall still be forced to remain, for I shall soon have other charges, not Faramir only. Now I must go down to meet those who come. I have seen a sight upon the field that is very grievous in my heart, but greater sorrow may yet come to pass. Come with me, Pippin. But you, Beregond, should return to the citadel, and tell the chief to the guard there what has fallen. It will be his duty, I fear, to withdraw you from the guard, but say to him that, if I may give you counsel, you should be sent to the houses of healing, to be the guard and servant of your captain, and to be at his side when he awakes, if that shall ever be again. For by you he was saved from the fire. Go now. I shall return soon.
With that he turned away and went with Pippin down towards the lower city, and even as they hastened on their way, the wind brought a grey rain, And all the fires sank, and there arose a great smoke before them. A mist was in Merry's eyes of tears and weariness when they drew near the ruined gate of Minas Tirith. He gave little heed to the wreck and slaughter that lay about all. Fire and smoke, and stench was in the air, for many engines had been burned or cast into the fire pits, and many of the slain also, while here and there lay many carcasses of the great Southron monsters, half burned or broken by stone cast, or shot through the eyes by the valiant archers of Morthond. The flying rain had ceased for a time, and the sun gleamed up above. But all the lower city was still wrapped in a smouldering reek. Already men were laboring to clear a way through the jetsam of battle, and now out of the gate came some bearing litters. Gently they laid Eowyn upon soft pillows, but the king's body they covered with a great cloth of gold, and they bore torches about him, and their flames, pale in the sunlight, were fluttered by the wind. So Theoden and Eowyn came to the city of Gondor, and all who saw them bared their heads and bowed, and they passed through the ash and fume of the burnt circle, and went on and up along the streets of stone. To Merry the ascent seemed age-long, a meaningless journey in a hateful dream, going on and on to some dim ending that memory cannot seize. Slowly the lights of the torches in front of him flickered and went out, and he was walking in the darkness, and he thought, "This is a tunnel leading to a tomb. There we will stay forever." But suddenly, into his dream there fell a living voice. He looked up and the mist before his eyes cleared a little. There was Pippin. They were face to face in a narrow lane, and but for themselves it was empty. He rubbed his eyes. "Where is the king? And Eowyn?" Then he stumbled and sat down on a doorstep and began to weep again.
They have gone up into the citadel,
said Pippin.
"I think you must have fallen asleep on your feet and taken the wrong turning. When we found that you were not with them, Gandalf sent me to look for you. Poor old Merry. How glad am I to see you again. But you are worn out, and I won't bother you with any talk. But tell me, are you hurt? Or wounded?"
"No," said Merry.
"Well,
"I don't think so. But I can't use my right arm, Pippin. Not since I stabbed him. My sword burned all the way like a piece of wood." Pippin's face was anxious.
well, you had better come with me as quick as you can,"
he said.
"I wish I could carry you. You aren't fit to walk any further. They shouldn't have let you walk at all, but you must forgive them. So many dreadful things have happened to the city, Merry, that one poor hobbit coming in from the battle is easily overlooked."
"It's not always a misfortune being overlooked," said Merry. "I was overlooked just now by... No, I can't speak of it. Help me, Pippin. It's all going dark again. My arm is so cold."
"Well, lean on me, Merry lad," said Pippin. "Come now, foot by foot. It's not far."
"Are you going to bury me?" said Merry.
"No, indeed,"
said Pippin, trying to sound cheerful though his heart was wrung with fear and pity. "No, we are going to the houses of healing." They turned out of the lane that ran between tall houses and the outer wall in fourth circle, and they regained the main street, climbing up to the citadel. Step by step they went, while Merry swayed and murmured as one in sleep.
"I'll never get in there,"
thought Pippin.
"Is there no one to help me? I can't leave him here."
Just then, to his surprise, a boy came running up behind, and as he passed he recognized Birgil, Baragon's son. He called,
"Where are you going? Glad to see you again, and still alive."
"I am running errands for the healers.
said Birgil.
I cannot stay."
"Don't.
Said Pippin.
But tell them up there that I have a sick hobbit, a Periant, mind you, come from the battlefield. I don't think he can walk so far. If Mithrandir is here, he'll be glad of the message."
Birgil ran on,
"I'd better wait here,"
thought Pippin. So he let Merry sink gently down onto the pavement in a patch of sunlight. And then he sat down beside him, laying Merry's head in his lap. He felt his body and limbs gently, and took his friend's hand in his own. The right hand felt icy to the touch. It was not long before Gandalf himself came in search of them. He stooped over Merry and caressed his brow. Then he lifted him carefully.
He should have been born and honored into the city,
He said,
He has well repaid my trust. For if Elrond had not yielded to me, neither of you would have set out. And then far more grievous would the evils of this day have been.
He sighed.
And yet here is another charge on my hands, while all the time the battle hangs in the balance.
So at last Faramir and Eowyn and Meriadoc were laid in beds in the houses of healing. And there they were tended well. For though all lore was in these latter days fallen from its fullness of old, the leechcraft of Gondor was still wise, and skilled in the healing of wound and hurt, and all such sickness as east of the sea mortal men were subject to, save old age only. For that they had found no cure, and indeed the span of their lives had now waned to little more than that of other men, and those among them who passed the tale of 50 years with vigour were grown few, save in the houses of purer blood. But now their art and knowledge were baffled, for there were many sick of a malady that would not be healed, and they called it the Black Shadow, for it came from the Nazgul, and those who were stricken with it fell slowly into an ever deeper dream, and then passed to a silence and a deadly cold, and so died. And it seemed to the tenders of the sick that on the halfling and on the Lady of Rohan this malady lay heavily. Still, at whiles, as the morning wore away, they would speak, murmuring in their dreams, and the watchers listened to all that they said, hoping perhaps to learn something that would help them to understand their hurts. But soon they began to fall down into the darkness, and as the sun turned west, a grey shadow crept over their faces. But Faramir burned with a fever that would not abate. Gandalf went from one to the other, full of care, and he was told all that the watchers could hear. And so the day passed, while the great battle outside went on with shifting hopes and strange tidings. And still Gandalf waited and watched, and did not go forth. Till at last the red sunset filled all the sky, and the light through the windows fell on the grey faces of the sick. Then it seemed to those who stood by that in the glow the faces flushed softly, as with health returning. But it was only a mockery of hope. Then an old wife, Eorith, the eldest of the women who served in that house, looking on the fair face of Faramir, wept, for all the people loved him, and she said,
Alas, if he would die. But that there were kings in Gondor.
As there were once upon a time, they say, for it is said in old lore, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so the rightful king would ever be known.
And Gandalf, who stood by, said,
Men may long remember your words, Eorith, for there is hope in them. Maybe a king has indeed returned to Gondor. Or have you not heard the strange tidings that have come to the city?
I have been too busy with this and that to heed all the crying and shouting.
she answered.
Is that those murdering devils do not come to this house and trouble the sick.
Then Gandalf went out in haste, and already the fire in the sky was burning out, and the smouldering hills were fading, while ash-grey evening crept over the fields. Now, as the sun went down, Aragorn and Eomer and Imrahil drew near the city with their captains and knights, and when they came before the gate, Aragorn said,
Behold the sun setting in a great fire. It is a sign of the end, and fall of many things, and a chance in the tides of the world. But this city and realm has rested in the charge of the stewards for many long years, and I fear that if I enter it unbidden, then doubt and debate may arise, which should not be while this war is fought. I will not enter it, nor make any claim until it be seen whether we or Mordor shall prevail. Men shall pitch my tents upon the field, and here I will await the welcome of the lord of the city.
But Eomer said,
Already you have raised the banner of the kings and displayed the tokens of Elendil's house. Will you suffer these to be challenged?
No, said Aragorn, but I deem the time unripe, and I have no mind for strife, except with our enemy and his servants. And the Prince Imrahil said,
Your words, Lord, are wise. If one who is a kinsman of the Lord Denethor may counsel in this matter.
And his mood has been strange since his son was stricken down. Yet I would not have you remain like a beggar at the door.
Not a beggar,
said Aragorn.
say a captain of the Rangers. who were unused to cities and houses of stone. And he commanded that his banner should be furled. And he did off the star of the North Kingdom and gave it to the keeping of the sons of Elrond. Then the Prince Imrahil and Eomer of Rohan left him, and passed through the city in the tumult of the people, and mounted to the citadel, and they came to the hall of the tower, seeking the steward. But they found his chair empty, and before the dais lay Theoden king of the Mark, upon a bed of state, and 12 torches stood about it, and 12 guards, knights of both Rohan and Gondor. And the hangings of the bed were of green and white, but upon the king was laid a great cloth of gold, up to his breast, and upon that his unsheathed sword, and at his feet his shield. The light of the torches shimmered in his white hair like the sun in the spray of a fountain. But his face was fair and young, save that a peace lay on it beyond the reach of youth, and it seemed that he slept. When they had stood silent for a time beside the king, Imrahil said, "Where is the steward? And where also is Mithrandir?" And one of the guards answered,
The steward of Gondor is in the houses.
but Eomer said,
Where is Lady Eowyn, my sister? For surely she should be lying beside the king in no less honor. Where have they bestowed her?
And Imrahil said, "But the Lady Eowyn was yet living when they bore her hither. Did you not know?" Then hope unlooked for came so suddenly to Eomer's heart, and with it the bite of care and fear renewed, that he said no more, but turned and went swiftly from the hall, and the prince followed him. And when they came forth, evening had fallen, and many stars were in the sky. And there came Gandalf on foot, and with him one cloaked in grey, and they met before the doors of the houses of healing. And they greeted Gandalf and said, "We seek the steward, and the men say that he is in this house. Has any hurt befallen him? And the Lady Eowyn, where is she?" And Gandalf answered,
She lies within, and is not dead, but is near death. But the Lord Faramir was wounded by an evil dart, as you have heard, and he is now the steward. For Denethor has departed, and his house is in ashes.
And they were filled with grief and wonder at the tale that he told. But Imrahil said, "So victory is shorn of gladness, and it is bitter brought, if both Gondor and Rohan are in one day bereft of their lords. Eomer rules the Rohirrim. Who shall rule the city meanwhile? Shall we not send now for the Lord Aragorn?" And the cloaked man spoke and said, "He is come." And they saw as he stepped into the light of the lantern by the door that it was Aragorn, wrapped in the great cloak of Lorien above his mail, and bearing no other token than the green stone of Galadriel. "Come because Gandalf begs me to do so," he said. "But for the present I am but the captain of the Dunedain of Arnor, and the Lord of Dol Amroth shall rule the city until Faramir wakes. But it is my counsel that Gandalf should rule us all in the days that follow, and in our dealings with the enemy." And they agreed upon that. Then Gandalf said,
Let us not stay at the door, for the time is urgent. Let us enter, for it is only in the coming of Aragorn that any hope remains for the sick that lie in the house. Thus spake Eorith, wise woman of Gondor. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so shall the rightful king be known.
Then Aragorn entered first, and the others followed. And there at the door were 2 guards in the livery of the citadel, one tall, but the other scarce the height of a boy. And when he saw them, he cried aloud in surprise and joy.
Strider! How splendid! Do you know, I guessed it was you in the black ships. But they were all shouting Corsairs and wouldn't listen to me. How did you do it?
Aragorn laughed, and took the hobbit by the hand. "Well met indeed," he said, "but there is no time yet for travellers' tales." But Imrahil said to Eomer, "Is it thus? Crown in some other name?" And Aragorn, hearing him, turned and said, "Verily, for in the high tongue of old I am Elessar, the Elfstone, and Envinyata, the Renewer." And he lifted from his breast the green stone that lay there. "But Strider shall be the name of my house, if that be ever established. In the high tongue it will not sound so ill, and Tel Kontar I will be, and all the heirs of my body." And with that they passed into the house, and as they went towards the rooms where the sick were tended, Gandalf told of the deeds of Eowyn and Meriadoc.
For,
He said,
long have I stood by them. At first they spoke much of their dreaming,
before they sank into the deadly darkness. Also it is given to me to see many things far off. Aragorn went first to Faramir, and then to the Lady Eowyn, and last to Merry. When he had looked on the faces of the sick, and seen their hurts, he sighed. Here I must put forth all such power and skill as is given to me, he said. Would that Elrond were here, for he is the eldest of all our race, and has the greater power. And Éomer, seeing that he was sorrowful and weary, said, First you must rest, surely, and at least eat a little. But Aragorn answered, Nay, for these three, and most soon for Faramir, time is running out. All speed is needed. Then he called to Eoreth and said, You have stored in this house of the herbs of healing.
Yes, Lord.
She answered,
But not enough, I reckon, for all that will need them. But I am sure I do not know where we shall find them. This dreadful day. What with fires and burnings in the lands, and the lads that run so few, and all the roads blocked. Why, it is days out of count since ever again. But we do our best.
I will judge when I see, said Aragorn. One thing also is short time for speech. Have you Athlas? She answered.
He knows all the old name.
It is also called Kingsfoil, said Aragorn. And maybe you know it by that name, for so the country folk call it in these latter days, said Eoreth.
None of it, I'm sure. Why, I have never heard it had any great virtue, and it... And it... Sweet.
Wholesome verily, said Aragorn.
And now, Dane, if you love the Lord Faramir, run as quick as your tongue and get me Kingsfoil if there is any leaf in the city.
And if not, said Gandalf, I will ride to Losarna with Eoreth behind me, and she shall take me to the woods, but not to her sisters, and Shadowfax shall show her the meaning of haste. When Eoreth was gone, Aragorn bade the other women to make water hot. When he took Faramir's hand in his, and laid the other hand upon the sick man's brow, it was drenched with sweat. But Faramir did not move or make any sign, and seemed hardly to breathe. He is nearly spent, said Aragorn, turning to Gandalf. This comes not from the wound. See, that is healing. Had he been smitten by some dart of the Nazgul as you thought, he would have died that night. This turn was given by some Southron arrow, I would guess. Who drew it forth? Was it kept? Said Imrahil, and staunched the wound. To do. It was, as I remember, just such a dart as the Southrons use. Yet I believe that it came from the shadows above, for else his fever and sickness were not to be understood, since the wound was not kept or vital. How then do you read the matter? Weariness, grief for his father's mood, a wound, and over all the black breath, said Aragorn. He is a man of staunch will, for already he had come close under the shadow before ever he rode to battle on the outwalls. Slowly the dark must have crept on him, even as he fought and strove to hold his outpost. Would that I could have been here sooner. Thereupon the herb master entered. Six name it, he said. Or Arthalas in the noble tongue, or those who know somewhat of the Valinorian. I do so, said Aragorn, and I care not whether you say Aslaranion or Kingsfoil, or so long as you have some. Your pardon, lord, said the man. I see you are a lord master, not merely a captain of war, but alas, sir, we do not keep this thing in the houses of healing, where only the gravely hurt or sick are tended. For it has no virtue, save perhaps to sweeten a foul air, or to drive away some passing heaviness. Unless, of course, you give heed to rhymes of old days, which women such as our good Eoreth repeat. Breath blows, death shadows. Garbled in the... But old folks do. Then in the name of the king, go and find some old man of less lore and more wisdom who keeps some in his house, cried Gandalf. Now Aragorn knelt beside Faramir, and held a hand upon his brow, and those that watched felt that some great struggle was going on, for Aragorn's face grew grey with weariness, and ever and anon he called the name of Faramir.
but each time more faintly to their hearing, as if Aragorn himself was removed from them, and walked afar in some dark vale, calling for one that was lost. And at last Burgle came running in, and he bore 6 leaves in a cloth.
It's King's fault.
He said,
It will serve, sir.
then looking at Faramir, he burst into tears. But Aragorn smiled. It will serve, he said. The worst is now over. Stay and be comforted. Then, taking 2 leaves, he laid them on his hands and breathed on them. And then he crushed them, and straightway a living freshness filled the room, as if the air itself awoke and tingled, sparkling with joy. And then he cast the leaves into the bowls of streaming water that were brought to him, and at once all hearts were lightened, for the fragrance that came to each was like a memory of dewy mornings of unshadowed sun in some land of which the fair world in spring is itself but a fleeting memory. But Aragorn stood up as one refreshed, and his eyes smiled as he held a bowl before Faramir's dreaming face. Said Eoreth to a woman that stood beside her, Suddenly Faramir stirred, and he opened his eyes, and he looked on Aragorn, who bent over him, and a light of knowledge and love was kindled in his eyes, and he spoke softly. My lord, you called me. I come. What does the king command? Walk no more in the shadows, but awake, said Aragorn. You are weary. Rest a while and take food, and be ready when I return. I will, Lord, said Faramir. For who would lie idle when the king has returned? Farewell then for a while, said Aragorn. I must go to others who need me. And then he left the chamber with Gandalf and Imrahil, but Beregond and his son remained behind, unable to contain their joy. As he followed Gandalf and shut the door, Pippin heard Eoreth exclaim, and soon the word had gone out from the house that the king was indeed come among them, and after war he brought healing, and the news ran throughout the city. But Aragorn came to Eowyn, and he said, Here there is a grievous hurt and a heavy blow. The arm that was broken has been tended with due skill, and it will mend in time, if she has the strength to live. It is the shield arm that is maimed, but the chief evil comes through the sword arm, and that is where now seems no life, although it is unbroken. Alas, for she was pitted against a foe beyond the strength of her mind or body, and those who will take a weapon to such an enemy must be sterner than steel, if the very shock shall not destroy them. It was an evil doom that set her in this path, for she is a fair maiden, fairest lady of a house of queens, and yet I know not how I should speak of her. When I first looked on her and perceived her unhappiness, it seemed to me that I saw a white flower standing straight and proud, shapely as a lily, and yet knew that it was hard, as if wrought by elf rites out of steel. Or was it, maybe, a frost that had turned its sap to ice? And so it stood, bittersweet, still fair to see, but stricken, soon to fall and die. Her malady begins far back before this day, does it not, Eomer? He answered. I knew not that Eowyn, my sister, was touched by any force. Care of dread she had, and shared with me in the days of Wormtongue and the king's bewitchment, and she tended the king in growing fear, but that did not bring her to this pass. My friend, said Gandalf, you had horses, and deeds of arms, and the free fields. But she, born in the body of a maid, had a spirit and courage at least a match of yours. Yet she was doomed to wait upon an old man whom she loved as a father, and watching him falling into a mean, dishonored dotage. And her part seemed to her more ignoble than that of the staff he leaned on. Think you that Wormtongue had poison only for Theoden's ears? Doted. What is the house of Eorl but a thatched barn where brigands drink and reek?
and their brats roll on the floor amongst their dogs. Have you not heard those words before? Saruman spoke them, the teacher of Wormtongue, though I do not doubt that Wormtongue at home wrapped their meaning in terms more cunning. My lord, if your sister's love for you and her will still bent to their duty had not restrained her lips, you might have heard even such things as these escape them. But who knows what she spoke to the darkness, alone, and in bitter watches of the night, when all her life seemed shrinking, and all the walls of her bower closing in about her. A hutch to trammel some wild thing in. Then Eomer was silent, and looked on his sister, as if pondering anew all the days of their past life together. But Aragorn said, I saw also what you saw, Eomer. Few other griefs amid the ill chances of this world have more bitterness and shame for a man's heart than to behold the love of a lady so fair and brave that cannot be returned. Sorrow and pity have followed me ever since I left her, desperate in Dunharrow, and rode to the paths of the dead, and no fear upon that way was so present as the fear of what might befall her. And yet, Eomer, I say to you that she loves you more truly than me. For you she loves and knows, but in me she loves only a shadow and a thought, a hope of glory and great deeds, and lands far from the fields of Rohan. I have, maybe, the power to heal her body and to recall her from the dark valley, but to what she will awake, hope or forgetfulness or despair, I do not know. And if to despair, then she will die, unless other healing comes which I cannot bring. Alas, for her deeds have set her among the queens of great renown. Then Aragorn stooped and looked in her face, and it was indeed white as a lily, cold as frost, and hard as a graven stone. But he bent and kissed her on the brow, and called her softly, saying, Eowyn, Eamond's daughter, awake, for your enemy has passed away. She did not stir, but now she began to breathe deeply, so that her breast rose and fell beneath the white linen of the sheet. Once more Aragorn bruised 2 leaves of athalas, and cast them into steaming water, and he laved her brow with it, and her right arm lying cold and nerveless on the coverlet. Then, whether Aragorn had indeed some forgotten power of Westernesse, or whether it was but his words of the Lady Eowyn that wrought on them, as the sweet influence of the herb lore about the chamber, it seemed to those who stood by that a keen wind blew through the window, and it so bore no scent, but was an air wholly fresh and clean and young, as if it had not been breathed by any living thing, and came new made from snowy mountains high beneath a dome of stars, or from shores of silver far away, washed by seas of foam. Awake, Eowyn, Lady of Rohan, said Aragorn again. And he took her right hand in his, and felt it warm with life returning. Awake, the shadow is gone and the darkness is washed clean. Then he laid her hand in Eomer's, and stepped away. He said, and he passed silently from the chamber. Eowyn! Eowyn! Cried Eomer amidst his tears. But she opened her eyes and said,
Eomer, what joy is this? For they said that you were slain. Nay, but that was only the dark voices in my dream. How long have I been dreaming?
Not long, my sister, said Eomer. But think no more on it.
I am strangely weary,
she said.
I must rest a little. But tell me, what of the Lord of the Mark? Alas, do not tell me that that was a dream, for I know that it was not. He is dead, as he foresaw.
He is dead, said Eomer, but he bade me say farewell to Eowyn, dearer than daughter. He lies now in great honour in the citadel of Gondor.
That is grievous,
she said.
and yet it is good beyond all that I dared to hope in the dark days, when it seemed that the house of Eorl was sunk in honour, less than any shepherd's cot. And what of the king's esquire, the halfling? Eomer, you shall make him a knight of the Riddermark, for he is valiant.
He lies nearby in his house, and I will go to him, said Gandalf. Eomer shall stay here for a while, but do not speak yet of war or woe. until you are made whole again. Great gladness it is to see you awake again to health and hope, so valiant a lady.
To health,
Said Eowyn.
it may be so. At least while there is an empty saddle for some fallen rider that I can fill, and there are deeds to do. But hope, I do not know.
Gandalf and Pippin came to Merry's room, and there they found Aragorn standing by the bed.
Poor old Merry!
Cried Pippin, and he ran to the beside, for it seemed to him that his friend looked worse, and a greyness was in his face, as if a weight of years of sorrow lay on him. And suddenly a fear seized Pippin that Merry would die.
Do not be afraid,
Said Aragorn. I came in time, and I have called him back. He is weary now and grieved, and he has taken a hurt like the Lady Eowyn, daring to smite that deadly thing. But these evils can be amended. So strong and gay a spirit in him, his grief he will not forget. But it will not darken his heart. It will teach him wisdom. Then Aragorn laid his hand on Merry's head, and passing his hand gently through the brown curls, he touched the eyelids and called him by name. And when the fragrance of Athelas stole through the room, like the scent of orchards and of heather in the sunshine full of bees, suddenly Merry awoke. And he said,
I'm hungry. What's the time? Past supper time now.
said Pippin.
Though I could bring you something if they will let me.
Said Gandalf.
Good.
Said Merry.
Then I would like supper first, and after that a pipe.
And then his face clouded.
No, not a pipe. I don't think I'll smoke again.
Said Pippin.
Well,
Answered Merry slowly.
he is dead. It has brought it all back to me. He said he was sorry he had never had a chance of talking herblore with me. Almost the last thing he ever said. I shan't ever be able to smoke again without thinking of him. That day, Pippin, when he rode up to Isengard and was so polite.
Smoke then and think of him, said Aragorn, for he was a gentle heart and a great king and kept his oaths. And he rose out of the shadows to a last fair morning. Though your service to him was brief, it should be a memory glad and honourable to the end of your days. Merry smiled.
Well then,
He said,
if Strider will provide what is needed, I will smoke and think. I had some of Saruman's best in my jacket, but what became of it in the battle, I'm sure I don't know.
Master Meriadoc, said Aragorn, if you think that I have passed through the mountains in the realm of Gondor with fire and sword to bring herbs to a careless soldier who throws away his gear, you are mistaken. If your pack has not been found, then you must send for the herb masters of this house, and he will tell you that he did not know that the herb you desire had any virtues, but that it is called Westman's weed by the vulgar, and Galenus by the noble, and other names in other tongues more learned, and after adding a few half-forgotten rhymes that he does not understand, he will regretfully inform you that there is none in the house, and he will leave you to reflect on the history of tongues. And so now must I. For I have not slept in such a bed as this, since I rode from Dunharrow, nor eaten since the dark before dawn. Merry seized his hand and kissed it.
I am rightfully sorry,
He said,
Go at once. Ever since that night at Bree, we've been a nuisance to you. But it is the way of my people to use light words at such times and say less than they mean. We fear to say too much. It robs us of the right words when a jest is out of place.
I know that well, or I would not deal with you in the same way, said Aragorn.
May the Shire live forever unwithered.
And kissing Merry, he went out, and Gandalf went with him. Pippin remained behind.
Was there anyone like him?
He said,
Except Gandalf, of course. I think they must be related. My dear ass, your pack is lying by your bed, and you had it on your back when I met you. He saw it all the time, of course. And anyway, I have some stuff of my own. Come on now, Longbottom, leave it is. Fill up while I run and see about some food. Let's be easy for a bit. Dear me. We dukes and brandybucks. We can't live long on the heights.
No, said Merry.
I can't. Not yet, at any rate. But at least, Pippin,
We can now see him and honor them. It is best to love first what you are fitted to love, I suppose. You must start somewhere and have some roots. The soil of the Shire is deep. Still, there are things deeper and higher, and not a gaffer could tend his garden in what he calls peace but for them. Whether he knows about them or not, I'm glad I know about them. A little. But I don't know why I'm talking like this. Where's that life? And get my pipe out of my pack if it isn't broken. Aragorn and Gandalf went now to the Warden of the Houses of Healing, and they counselled him that Faramir and Éowyn should remain here and still be tended with care for many days. The Lady Éowyn, said Aragorn, will wish soon to rise and depart, but she should not be permitted to do so. If you can in any way restrain her until at least 10 days be past.
As for Faramir,
Said Gandalf,
he must soon learn that his father is dead. But the full tale of the madness of Denethor should not be told to him until he is quite healed and has duties to do. See that Baragond and the Perian who are present do not speak to him of these things yet. And the other Perian, Meriadoc, who is under my care, what of him?
said the Warden. Said Aragorn.
They are a remarkable race,
Said the Warden, nodding his head.
very tough in the fibre, I deem.
At the doors of the houses many were already gathered to see Aragorn, and they followed after him. And when at last he had supped, men came and prayed that he would heal their kinsmen or their friends whose lives were in peril through hurt or wound, or who lay under the black shadow. And Aragorn arose and went out, and he sent for the sons of Elrond, and together they laboured far into the night. And word went through the city, the king is come again indeed. And they named him Elfstone, because of the green stone that he wore. And so the name which it was foretold at his birth that he should bear was chosen for him by his own people. And when he could labour no more, he cast his cloak about him, and slipped out of the city, and went to his tent just ere dawn, and slept for a little. And in the morning the banner of Dol Amroth, a white ship like a swan upon blue water, floated from the tower. And men looked up and wondered if the coming of the king had been but a dream. The morning came after the day of battle, and it was fair with light clouds and the wind turning westward. Legolas and Gimli were early abroad, and they begged leave to go up into the city, for they were eager to see Merry and Pippin.
It is good to see that they are still alive,
Said Gimli.
They cost us great pains in our march over Rohan, and I would not have such pains all wasted.
Together the elf and the dwarf entered Minas Tirith, and folk that saw them pass marvelled to see such companions, for Legolas was fair of face, beyond the measure of men, and he sang an elven song in a clear voice as he walked in the morning. But Gimli stalked behind him, stroking his beard and staring about him.
There is some good stonework here,
He said as he looked at the walls.
but also some that is less good, and the streets could be better contrived. When Aragorn comes into his own, I shall offer him the service of stone rights of the mountains, and we will make this a town to be proud of.
They need more gardens, said Legolas. The houses are dead, and there is too little here that grows and is glad. If Aragorn comes into his own, the people of the wood shall bring him birds that sing, and trees that do not die. At length they came to the Prince Imrahil, and Legolas looked at him and bowed low, for he saw that here indeed was one who had elven blood in his veins. Hail, Lord, he said. It is long since the people of Nimrodil left the woodlands of Lorien, and yet still one may see that not all sailed from Mamlor's haven west over the water. So it is said in the lore of my land, said the prince. Yet never has one of the fair folk been seen here for years beyond count, and I marvel to see one here now in the midst of sorrow and war. What do you seek? I am one of the 9 companions who set out with Mithrandir from Imladris, said Legolas, and with this dwarf, my friend, I came with the Lord Aragorn. But now we wish to see our friends Meriadoc and Peregrine, who are in your keeping, we are told. You will find them in the houses of healing, and I will lead you thither, said Imrahil. It will be enough if you send one to guide us, Lord, said Legolas. For Aragorn sends his message to you. He does not wish to enter the city again at this time. Yet there is need for the captains to hold council at once, and he prays that you and Eomer of Rohan will come down to his tents as soon as may be. Mithrandir is already there. We will come, said Imrahil, and they parted with courteous words. That is a fair lord and a great captain of men, said Legolas. If Gondor has such men still in these days of fading, great must have been its glory in the days of its rising, said Gimli. Yet seldom do they fail of their seed, said Legolas, and that will lie in the dust and rot to spring up again in times and places unlooked for. The deeds of men will outlast us, Gimli.
And yet come to naught in the end what might have been, I guess,
said the dwarf. To that the elves know not the answer, said Legolas. With that the servant of the prince came and led them to the houses of healing. And there they found their friends in the garden, and their meeting was a merry one. For a while they walked and talked, rejoicing for a brief space in peace and rest under the morning high up in the windy circles of the city. Then, when Merry became weary, they went and sat upon the wall with the greensward of the houses of healing behind them, and away southward before them was the Anduin glittering in the sun, as it flowed away, out of the sight even of Legolas into the wide flats and green haze of Lebanon and South Ithilien. And now Legolas fell silent, while the others talked, and he looked out against the sun, and as he gazed he saw white seabirds beating up the river. "Look!" he cried. "Gulls! They are flying far inland. A wonder they are to me and a trouble to my heart. Never in all my life had I met them until we came to Pelargir, and there I heard them crying in the air as we rode to the battle of the ships. Then I stood still, forgetting war in Middle-earth, for their wailing voices spoke to me in the sea. The sea. Alas, I have not yet beheld it. But deep in the hearts of all my kindred lies the sea longing, which it is perilous to stir. Alas for the gulls! No peace shall I have again under breach or under realm."
"Say not so,"
said Gimli.
"There are countless things still to see in Middle-earth, and great works to do. But if all the fair folk take to the havens, it will be a duller world for those who are doomed to stay."
"Dull and dreary indeed," said Merry. "You must not go to the havens, Legolas. There will always be some folk, big or little, and even a few wise dwarves like Gimli who will need you."
Exactly.
"At least I hope so, though I feel somehow that the worst in this war is still to come. How I wish it was all over. And well over." "Don't be so gloomy," cried Pippin. "The sun is shining, and here we are together for a day or two at least. I want to hear more about you all. Come, Gimli. You and Legolas have mentioned your strange journey with Strider about a dozen times already this morning, but you haven't told me anything about it."
"The sun may shine here,"
said Gimli,
"but there are memories of that road that I do not wish to recall out of the darkness. Had I known what was before me, I think that not any friendship would I have taken to the paths of the dead."
The paths of the dead,
said Pippin.
I heard Aragorn say that, and I wondered what he would mean. Won't you tell us some more?
"Not willingly,"
said Gimli.
"for upon that road I was put to shame. Gimli, Glóin's son, who had deemed himself more tough than men and hardier under earth than any elf. But neither did I prove, and I was held to the road only by the will of Aragorn."
"And by the love of him also," said Legolas. "For all those who come to know him come to love him after his own fashion. Even the cold maiden of the Rohirrim. It was at early morn of the day ere you came here, Merry, and we left Dunharrow, and such a fear was on all the folk that none would look on our going, save the Lady Eowyn, who lies now hurt in the house below.